Following the culmination of the Horus heresy and the Emperor's subsequent internment within the life support systems of the Golden Throne, Rabute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, would begin developing a number of contingency plans in order to ensure that such an event would never plague the Imperium again. The first of these contingencies was the introduction of the Codex Astartes, a text which not only outlined battlefield tactics and doctrine, but saw the 9 loyalist legions of the Legione Astartes being broken down into multiple smaller chapters, with each chapter to consist of no more than 1,000 marines. The second was to create an entirely new legion of warriors, one that would be used to aid the Imperium during its darkest hour. With the aid of an Arch Magos Dominus of the Adeptus Mechanicus named Belisarius Cawl, Guilliman would lay the foundations for what would become known within historical records as the Primaris Project. The fruits of the Primaris Project would eventually result in the creation of what is considered the next stage in the evolution of the Adeptus Astartes, the Primaris Marines. These Primaris Marines would not only prove to be larger, stronger, and more resilient than the older Firstborn Astartes, but the purity of the Primaris genome results in their gene seed being far more stable in comparison. As well as this, Primaris Marines also boast a number of additional organ implants not found within their firstborn kin: the sinew coils, Belisarian furnace, and Magnificat. The sinew coils reinforce a Space Marine's tendons and ligaments with durametallic cabling, which not only amplifies their strength, but also adds an additional layer of subdermal durability. The Belisarian furnace acts as something akin to an internal defibrillator, delivering a cocktail of stimulants into an Astartes bloodstream during times of extreme stress or upon experiencing severe physical trauma, which also aid in the rapid regeneration of damaged tissue. The Magnificat produces various hormones that not only increase the body's growth functions, but also amplifies the effects of a Space Marine's other gene seed implants. This is most notably shown with the Biscopia and Osmodular organs, resulting in Primaris Marines developing an exceptionally large and robust musculoskeletal structure. However, despite the numerous benefits it bestows to a Primaris, the Magnificat is in itself a lesser and incomplete version of the dual-valve immortis gland that the Emperor had originally developed for the Primarchs, an organ as otherwise known more informally as the godmaker. Indeed, when Belisarius Cawl consulted the various genetic blueprints he used to help develop these new implants, the Arch Magos could only find enough information and materiel to construct the dextrophic lobe, or right half of the organ. All information regarding the Centaurius, or left half of the organ, had been completely erased, though whether or not such data had been deliberately expunged from official records by the Emperor himself, or if some other, more nefarious source was responsible for its deletion, remains unknown. But this then leads to an intriguing question. What if Cawl had actually succeeded in developing a complete godmaker organ? Now admittedly, it is difficult if not outright impossible to truly discern what effect a complete godmaker immortis gland would have on an aspirant Astartes. However, given the implant's name, in conjunction with the fact that said organ was originally designed for the Primarchs, beings who are for all intents and purposes demigods, it would be reasonable to assume that such an organ would result in a Space Marine being not only more powerful than a modern Primaris, but perhaps even transforming them into what is, effectively, a mini Primarch. This is not to say that these hypothetical immortis Marines would be as large or as powerful as a true Primarch, however, merely that they would be physically and potentially even cognitively superior when compared to other Space Marines, though to what extent is uncertain. After all, the Primarchs are stated to have a wholly unique physiology, one which is as radically different from a Space Marine's as a Space Marine's is from that of a typical baseline human. An example of this is shown within the novella Prince of Crows, with the following quote from Sel Herec, the captain of the Night Lord's 43rd Company.
"Who among the Legion has ever treated a wounded Primarch before? We're working blind. The wounds have closed, though not cleanly. Blood loss is severe. Cranial damage and oxygen starvation are still both potentially terminal or crippling. Hemorrhaging is rampant. Organs I cannot even name are lacerated and several from vein networks we've never seen before. If he were human, if he were even one of us, a single one of his wounds would be enough to see him dead. He's sustained 11 such lethalities.
Because the Primarchs were described as having a number of organs that were seemingly unknown to the apothecaries of the Legione Astartes, this would appear to imply that they would have additional organs beyond even those boasted by modern Primaris Marines, assuming that their respective physiologies are in any way comparable. But seeing as how the purpose of the Magnificat, which as mentioned earlier is the right lobe of the immortis gland, is to, in essence, enhance the body, then it's not unreasonable to assume that the missing left lobe of the organ was designed to enhance the mind. In this case, it's possible that the lost component of the godmaker organ was intended to unlock one's latent psychic potential. While such an idea may at first glance seem incredibly far-fetched, it is worth noting that the Primarchs, in addition to being physically superior to a typical Astartes, were all psychically sensitive to a certain degree, even if only a handful of them could truly be described as being psychers in a traditional sense. This is most notably demonstrated within the novel Dark Imperium, with the following passage.
Guilliman lacked the psychic potential that his father had granted to several of his brothers, but he was a child of the Emperor's making, and he was sensitive to psychic energies of which a true non-psyker would be ignorant.
This psychic sensitivity displayed by the Primarchs would in turn be passed down to their gene sons, at least to some extent, as a number of Astartes would go on to manifest similar, albeit lesser versions of the abilities boasted by their gene fathers. For instance, Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard, was able to cloud the minds of others and melt into any surrounding shadows in order to become, for all intents and purposes, invisible. Those members of the Raven Guard Legion who displayed similar such talents, which would come to be known as Wraith Slipping, will be organised into specialist units known as the Mordathan, or Shadow Masters. But as the gene seed of the Raven Guard began to degrade and grow more and more unstable, it became increasingly rare for an Astartes to manifest the ability to Wraith Slip, and by late M41, as detailed within the audio drama The Geld, only 4 individuals from across all chapters of Caraxian heritage were known to be capable of doing so. Another example is shown with Sanguinius, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, who was blessed, or cursed, with the powers of precognition, granting him knowledge of events yet to come. This gift of foresight would go on to be inherited by several Blood Angels over the millennia, with one of the more notable such individuals in recent years being that of Corbulo, the chapter's current sanguinary high priest. It is thanks to Corbulo's ability to divine future events that the Blood Angels have been able to rapidly mobilize their forces against any encroaching threats to the Imperium, such as the Orcish assault upon the world of Armageddon or High Fleet Leviathan's invasion of the Baal system. If the missing half of the immortis gland was able to more reliably and consistently grant the warriors of the Adeptus Astartes abilities similar to those of their respective Primarchs, then this would undoubtedly prove to be an immense boon for the Imperial war machine as a whole. Indeed, not only could some chapters of Astartes potentially respond to enemy incursions long before they even begin, but others could go on to become unparalleled infiltrators, saboteurs, or otherwise specialized at operating behind enemy lines. Such benefits could, in theory, even be retroactively bestowed to older firstborn Astartes should they decide to undergo the necessary surgical augmentation to upgrade them into one of these hypothetical Immortis Marines. Such a procedure would be no different from that of crossing the Rubicon Primaris, the informal term used to describe the surgery that transforms a firstborn into a Primaris Marine. However, whether or not the act of crossing the theoretical Rubicon Immortis would be as dangerous as crossing the Rubicon Primaris, which initially had a 60% plus mortality rate, remains unknown, though it should be noted that the latter's rate of success has significantly increased in recent years. if the gene seed for Immortis Marines exhibited the same level of purity and stability found within the Primaris genome, then this could very well result in one particular gene line becoming favoured over the others, depending upon the specific abilities that such a lineage will manifest. Prior to the events of the Ultima Founding, which saw entire chapters of Primaris Marines being established, approximately 2/3 of all Space Marine chapters were descended from the Ultramarines Legion. The reason for this is not only due to the fact that the Ultramarines were the single largest legion of the Legione Astartes, and thus divided into the greatest number of successor chapters, but the chapter's gene seed is amongst the purest and most stable of all Astartes gene stocks, resulting in it becoming the most commonly utilised whenever new Space Marine chapters were to be established. However, if the Immortis Marines of any one particular gene line displayed exceptionally desirable traits or abilities, such as the aforementioned precognition of the Blood Angels, or the pseudo-invisibility of the Raven Guard, then this could result in that specific gene line becoming the preferred one to use for new chapters going forward. But again, all of these hypotheses are based on the assumption that the missing half of the Immortis gland will grant an Astartes similar abilities to those of their respective Primarchs. For as stated earlier, it is effectively impossible to truly discern what effects a complete godmaker organ would have upon a Space Marine's physiology. All we know for certain is that it would combine the properties of the Magnificat with something else entirely. But as to what that something is, however, all we can do is speculate. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.